Lo bàyyi oui c'est bon dama yónni woon. Bonjour. C'est bon? Mesdames, Messieurs, veuillez accueillir les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, s'il vous plaît. Voilà. Très bien, donc nous commençons à accueillir les chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Nous souhaitons la bienvenue aux chefs d'État et de gouvernement. C'est bon? Oui? J'y vais? Non, attends. Ok. D'accord. Les chefs d'État et de gouvernement en compagnie de son Excellence Monsieur Macky Sall, président de la République du Sénégal. Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, messieurs et madame de la presse. Merci beaucoup. Nous allons démarrer la cérémonie. Nous demandons, s'il vous plaît, à la presse de regagner l'espace qui leur est réservé à l'arrière de la salle. Merci d'avance. Attention, attendez. Attention. Merci, chers confrères et consoeurs, de regagner vos places à l'arrière de la salle pour que nous puissions démarrer cette cérémonie. Merci beaucoup. Je suis Dr Nafissatou Diouf et je suis très ravie d'être la maîtresse de cérémonie de ce haut sommet. Excellence, Monsieur le Président de la République, Monsieur Macky Sall, Président en exercice de l'Union africaine, Excellence, Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, Messieurs et Madame les présidents d'institutions de la République du Sénégal, Monsieur le directeur général des opérations de la Banque mondiale, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs de délégation, Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs, représentants des institutions internationales et des partenaires techniques et financiers, Mesdames, Messieurs, honorables invités, en vos rangs, titres, grades et qualités, nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue ici en terre sénégalaise à l'occasion de ce sommet de haut niveau consacrant le lancement officiel de la 20e reconstitution des fonds de l'Association internationale pour le développement de l'Afrique, IDA. Cette rencontre est une initiative de son Excellence Monsieur Macky Sall, Président de la République du Sénégal, Président en exercice de l'Union africaine et de la Banque mondiale. Le chronogramme de la journée se déroulera comme suit avec 3 grandes parties. La première partie sera d'abord consacrée au visionnage d'un film sur l'IDA. Ensuite, vous pourrez suivre une introduction de M. Axel van Trotzenberg, directeur des opérations de la Banque mondiale, sur le thème « Financement de la relance et de la transformation économique en Afrique ». Enfin, nous pourrons écouter le discours d'ouverture de son Excellence M. Macky Sall, Président de la République du Sénégal et par ailleurs Président en exercice de l'Union africaine. À l'issue de ce discours, il vous sera proposé une pause café pour les participants de la présente session, alors que les chefs d'État et de gouvernement seront à huis clos, avec un panel qui sera modéré par le Président de la République du Sénégal. Dans la deuxième partie, en ouverture, il y aura une séance de haut niveau, comme je l'ai dit, modérée par le Président de la République, puis le ministre des Finances et du Budget, M. Abdoulaye Daouda Diallo, fera la lecture de l'appel à l'action en présence des médias. La troisième partie sera l'un des temps forts de cette journée avec le discours de son Excellence M. Macky Sall, Président de la République du Sénégal au Salon Vert. Puis son Excellence le Président de la République du Sénégal offrira un déjeuner en l'honneur des chefs d'État et de gouvernement. Mesdames, Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, honorables invités, je vous invite à présent à visionner un film sur l'IDA.
Diversité, jeunesse, force, résilience, c'est l'Afrique. Un continent débordant de potentiel, comptant d'importantes réalisations en matière de développement et résolu à relever tous les défis. L'Association internationale de développement, aussi connue sous son sigle anglais IDA, est un partenaire de longue date de l'Afrique. L'IDA est fière de soutenir la résilience des Africains en investissant dans l'éducation, la santé, l'innovation numérique et les infrastructures, en créant des États probants à travers toute l'Afrique. Aujourd'hui, face aux multiples crises mondiales, l'IDA est plus que jamais déterminée à travailler avec les pays pour relever leurs défis de développement. Avec ce nouveau cycle d'IDA 20, la Banque mondiale se tient prête à accompagner le continent africain à recouvrer les gains perdus et à poursuivre ses avancées sur la voie de la transformation économique. L'IDA fait la différence en Afrique.
Je vous prie d'applaudir, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. À présent, je vous prie, Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, honorables invités, à suivre la présentation de M. Axel van Trotzenberg. Il est le directeur général des opérations de la Banque mondiale. Sous vos applaudissements, s'il vous plaît.
Good morning, Your Excellency, President Macky Sall, Your Excellencies, Heads of State, Your Excellencies, Prime Ministers and Ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's really an honor to be here with you today, and I would really like, on behalf of the World Bank, thank President Macky Sall for this initiative to have this meeting. And I thank him in his capacity as the President of the African Union to have organized, if you wish, this launching event for IDA 20. This is very important that we get together and see how the international community, and particularly the World Bank, can assist Africa in its development aspiration. So for us, the point of departure are the ambitions of the African countries, the ambition to grow inclusively and sustainably, create jobs, as well as to make sure that the human capital is improved, be it in the education, in the health area, and also keeping in mind that we are confronted with a situation of multiple crises where over the last 2 years we have seen a reversal of fortunes in the world, but also in Africa, and we have seen that unfortunately reflected in increasing poverty rates around the world. So this is where also IDA comes in. We need to be part of supporting African countries to be part of the success, but here I would like to send also one of the first major messages. The World Bank is a long-term partner and will stay a long-term partner, and whether that is in good times, but what is even more important, when times are more challenging and difficult, and we will stay there. I think what is very helpful in this IDA 20 cycle that there has been a difference is namely that the African heads of state have taken a direct interest in the directions of the negotiations of IDA. And that started last year when we had decided that with the IDA 19 resources, we should truncate the normally 3-year period in 2 years, given the crisis and given the needs of the continent to need more resources. So therefore we needed to negotiate early the IDA 20. What was particularly helpful was that Mr. Alassane Ouattara offered to organize a summit in July of last year to discuss also the strategic directions that IDA 20 may take. And there we created the Abidjan Declaration that was actually very, very helpful to help negotiate the policy package. And I would like to mention particularly a couple of ideas that were ultimately reflected in the package. One is jobs, jobs, jobs. This came everywhere. There is an incredible challenge. Every year, millions of young Africans are entering the labor market, and not always all the jobs are available. So a huge emphasis on this. Another thing where we have been learning a lot from yourselves is the emphasis over regional integration. You recently included an important trade pact. And the reason is that regional integration could be a motor for growth, needs to be supported, and that was in there. I thank you for that strong participation, because I think that the package became better as a result of that. The negotiations ultimately resulted in a $93 billion package, that over the next 3 years, and of which about 23.5 billion were through contributions by donors. Now, I know that a lot of donors are linked by video conference, so let me also thank them for their continued strong commitment, their also engagement with their parliaments to ensure the package that we could negotiate. So a sincere thank you to all the donors who are linked up. But also what was important that during the negotiations, we benefited from the borrower representatives. Half of the borrower representatives are from Africa, and they made sure that these things that were also reflected in the Abidjan Declaration were ultimately in the package. And I think here I would like to also mention something that is more challenging, and that is particularly the countries that are confronted by fragility. And one of the big problems is that once countries are engaged in conflict or where fragility is, many are withdrawing their support. The World Bank took a different decision. Instead, fragility requires more support, continued support, not walking away. And just to give you a sense, the last fiscal year for the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, we provided about $10 billion of support. And I think that is what needs to be seen, is that we need to stay engaged. In general, I think I would like to make another important point of the evolving nature of IDA. IDA was created in 1960 essentially to deal with particularly challenges in Asia, particularly India. But now, over the last 20 years, it has systematically moved towards Africa. Just to give you a sense, in around 2000, we provided about 15% of our resources, of our total resources. This is only the IDA resource. We have also IBRD resources. Those were going to Africa. Last year, it was almost half. And so it is very clear that this is going to stay. And what is even more important, in the case of IDA, we're getting close to $30 billion. But what is most important is that of the package that was negotiated, the 93 billion, 70% will go to Africa. Our expectation is that it will go, and so the big challenge, and therefore I'm happy that we have this meeting, is we are launching this implementation, so there will be a lot of hard work ahead of us. But what we would like to discuss also with you, how can we best strategically use these $65 billion to the maximum benefit of the continent? And I think as strategic choices to do a little bit more of everything, or you say we need to more strategically invest in certain activities. And your guidance and your discussion would be very appreciated, because that is what we need. Now then the hard work comes. What we have also said, operationally, you cannot work out of Washington. It is important to have an office in Washington. Most important is to have a presence in all of the African continents, and we're happy that we have it. We have right now 1,800 people on the ground working from Dakar to Dar es Salaam, from Addis to Joburg. I think this is what we need. The big advantage of being in the countries that we not only learn about your culture, about your history, but also better understand your needs. And that is going to be the key to our success in helping African countries to have the next year, hopefully, more successful, because we are all faced with this multiple crisis, and the last one is the crisis from the fallout from the war in Ukraine, which affects you badly through the channel of higher fuel prices, higher commodity price, and as a consequence, unfortunately, also higher inflation. And inflation, we all know, is the worst enemy of the poor. So that is where we will need to have. So just a couple of ideas where I think we received a lot of advice and suggestions on how one could strengthen this. One is energy access. And I think this is one of the ways where how can we support Africa to accelerate energy access. Having worked on East Asia, I sometimes was impressed how countries like Vietnam were able to increase access by 75 percentage points in 20 years. And the question I often say is, how can we repeat that revolution also in Africa? And I think there are very good conditions potentially for it when we are thinking not only nationally but also regionally and through the continent. A very promising development is, for example, the West African power pool that we are supporting. And our interest is how can we actually, through our operations, support and increase that ambition, be it in the areas in the energy area, and that can be from the renewable to gas to power, and that you have the necessary base load to actually scale up further the energy. So this is a topic where we are in dialogue, but for us, the interest is how can we be part of an accelerator in the individual countries. Another important topic is digital. It is now everywhere being talked about, digital revolution, and also the African Union during the presidency of President Kagame in 2019 agreed that the African continent should be completely digitally connected by 2030, meaning all Africans should have access. How can we support it? You see already progress here in the case of broadband, but how can we make that next leap? How can you best use the IDA resources for this? In this context, it seems to me also how one can mobilize here the private sector and use smartly those IDA resources that are needed by the public sector, but see how you can leverage private sector investment in these areas. Again, we would think that we can make a lot of progress. We have already quite a few projects in the pipeline. One plea we would like to make is particularly on the digital development, how one could actually harmonize the regulatory frameworks so that one doesn't face with a plethora of regulatory frameworks that may be not compatible with each other. So this may be also part of the regional integration area. Another area, and that is a more sobering one, that is food security. The crisis and the war in Ukraine have again highlighted the issue of food insecurity. Unfortunately, because of this war, there is an increase, there is a double increase. First, everybody feels the higher prices. Secondly, food insecurity is increasing and infecting millions around the world, including in Africa. And so what the World Bank in general has decided, and we announced that in April, we cannot wait. So we have said we will provide worldwide new resources to the tune of $12 billion, and 18 billion is available from existing operations, so up to $30 billion. In the first 3 months since April, we have committed almost $6 billion across the world, of which 3.9 billion was to Africa. Demand is high. My sense is maybe higher than the 12 billion that we have indicated. We will respond to this. And what I think is important in this context, we have to have a dual track approach. We have to respond to crisis as well as to the long-term needs, meaning that we have to work towards long-term reduction of food insecurity, and that means better resilience, better agricultural systems. And we have lately provided regional projects, one for West Africa for food system strengthening, and 2 weeks ago for East Africa and Southern Africa. Clearly, a lot more needs to be done. I think there is a good potential that we combine crisis management with also a long-term view, how we can improve the situation. And here, let me just reiterate, we have all the willingness and resolve to help you in this regard, because this is core development. I reminded the board of the World Bank when we discussed the East African food system strengthening project 2 weeks ago, that I said, here we are sitting together almost 50 years after the 1974 conference that was meant to eradicate hunger, and we still have this. This is not a good signal of the international community. We have to do better, and the only way to do it is together see how we can confront this problem and once and for all help solve it. And you will be able to count on World Bank support on this. But when we are thinking of food security, it is not only on agriculture system. We need also to think of social protection systems. And I think the good news is we learned a lot over the years that we need to have much better social security systems. We learned a lot from the Latin American debt crisis to build that, and now in many African countries, we have social protection systems that allow you to react very fast to adverse developments. And I think this was also very important during the crisis of the COVID crisis, that was able to count on social protection measures. We have been scaling this up enormously over the last 3 years. Just to give you say, we were investing on social protection, health and education, and we put worldwide about $65 billion into the countries to help deal with this very, very difficult challenge. So we think that this is something that we will need to continue to be focused on, particularly the problem you are facing, and even also the World Bank is facing. When in times of crisis, you tend to get so focused on crisis measures that sometimes you don't anymore talk about the sustainable development goals and the poverty reduction. I think we need to continue to force ourselves to be effective crisis managers, but never lose sight of the longer-term challenges. And here, I think human capital is essential. I was very happy yesterday that I had the chance to visit here in Senegal an higher education, professional education institute that trains young Senegalese for the job market. And what is wonderful to see is that with this kind of training, these kids are finding jobs. Over 90%, when they get out of school, are finding jobs. So what I really think is education will be key for also the job agenda, and how can we actually sustain this and support it. But that investment we will need to undertake, and I think we will need also to scale this up further. I want to finish, and it is important for your considerations when you're looking particularly at the $65 billion. The way this is negotiated is that about 2/3 of the amount is allocated to every country. We call that performance-based allocation, but it is about 2/3 of the money. Now, increasingly, there have been requests, be it from your side as well as from donor side, to have some windows that provide additional money. But that is now a substantial amount, is about $22 billion, a third of that as well. And they are in various forms. One is the scale-up window that allows to receive additional money for high-impact investments that can demonstrate transformational impact. A very important one is the regional window, and that has almost $8 billion. This is the window that many of you have been advocating, and it tends to be used to the max. And there is even often higher demand. For many countries that are hosting refugees, you know yourself that you are confronted with an additional cost, and that you have to manage in times of fiscal stress when the world economy is not doing that well. And so what we would like to offer is also a refugee window that allows country to, first of all, be grateful for the fact that you are hosting refugees, but also recognizing that you need some additional support to make it possible to attend to all the demands of these refugees. Another important one is the crisis response window that we have created actually during the financial crisis almost 13 years ago. This window is extremely in high demand, and certainly now, for example, with the food crisis, that many of you are facing not only fiscal stress, balance of state payment stress. So you see these extra costs are directly translated in a higher fiscal deficit, and for that you need additional support. Finally, we have also a private sector window, and then the whole idea is that when people are talking about private sector investment, it talks easily, but then everybody wants to be de-risked. And so, in the end, you are in a vicious circle. What we have said to our private sector arm, that is the IFC, and directed by a Senegalese, by Makta Diop, he and I go back a long time. We have worked very closely. But what is most important is it may help investments to de-risk. And that is very important. I think they are using these resources fully. I would only advise be aggressive on that, to use them. On the windows in general, what I say, all of you are sitting here, but in those there's competition. Because basically, I'm always say, use it or lose it. So one of the important things is that these resources are going to where the demand is. And if you have a lot of demand, then indeed you can use a lot of these resources. Let me just say this, that we are very excited about the support we have been receiving from you politically, through also your finance ministers, through your other sectoral ministers in developing the work, because it is one thing to talk about it, it is the other to really develop the projects. And we have been impressed. We're back. Let me just finish by this, that as I mentioned, this has required an incredible amount of cooperation, and I think I just want to recognize, and hopefully you can also convey that to your teams, that this requires a lot of close collaboration. And we have actually been felt privileged to have this commitment during times of COVID, where people have been working from home, through their iPads to prepare the projects. So I think this is something to build on, and we are looking forward to work closely on this. I'm directing them. One you probably already know, Usman Diagana. He is the Vice President for West Africa and Central Africa. And Victoria Kwakwa is the new Vice President for Eastern and Southern Africa. Usman has been doing this now for the last 2 years, and Victoria just finished her tenure as the Vice President for East Asia, that includes China, ASEAN, and the Pacific, and brings a lot of experience, particularly also on energy access in East Asia that was so successfully done. So we are looking very much forward to very close implementation. At the end of the day, I hope that in the next years we can sit together and see what result we have booked, because the only thing that at the end of the day will count, can we make together a difference? And here you can count on our full support. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup à Monsieur le Directeur Général des Opérations de la Banque mondiale, Monsieur Axel van Trottenberg, qui faisait une présentation sur les financements de la relance et de la transformation économique en Afrique. Il est revenu sur l'importance pour l'ensemble des parties prenantes.
He spoke about the importance for His Excellency, the President of Senegal, Mr. Macky Sall, current Chair of the African Union, for his opening remarks. Mr. President. Thank you very much. Excellency President Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo, Excellency President Muhammadu Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, thank you for your presence. Thank you also to His Excellency George Maniweya, President of the Republic of Liberia. Thank you, Excellency Mr. Julius Madabio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. Thank you and welcome to His Excellency Mr. Omaro Sissoko Embalo, President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Thank you to His Excellency, Her Excellency, Madam Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania. Thank you also to the Vice President of Cote d'Ivoire, to the Vice President of Zambia, to the Prime Minister of Equatorial Guinea, to the Prime Minister of Madagascar, to, I should say, Executive Prime Minister, and thank you above all to attending today for grace this significant gathering with the President. Thank you to Axel, Director General of Operations at the World Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President for West and Central Africa, for East and Southern Africa.
Chefs de délégation, mesdames, messieurs les ambassadeurs, représentants des institutions, chers partenaires, mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais avant toute chose
From the outset, I would like to say that this power cut is a sign of counter-performance that is not acceptable with regard.
Et quelque part, il y a quelqu'un qui n'a pas fait son travail. Et en Afrique, on n'a pas la culture.
In Africa, we do not have the culture. We need to sanction this action because you cannot have such a high-level meeting and that the hotel management accept these kind of situations. In actual fact, I have built a modern center in Jamhuri, but because of the Eid, the Muslim sacrifice holiday is approaching and there will be a lot of traffic, we wanted to keep you here in Dakar. But I think that the protocol has to take care of this kind of incident once and for all. This is not tolerable. If you want to make progress, we need to sanction people when they don't do their job. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet you and thank you warmly for your friendship and for gracing this summit for the launch of IDA 20. With your presence, with your participation, you are giving a solemn mark of our commitment in solidarity to serve our common development objectives. I would like to commend and thank the Director General of Operations of the World Bank Group. Thank you very much, Axel, for being with us this morning.
Please convey my greetings and thanks to our friend David Malpass. Merci à toutes les délégations.
Thank you to all the delegations attending.
Je souhaite
I wish each and every one of you a warm welcome and
nous tenons ces
a
assises
pleasant stay
collègues dans
in Dakar. We are gathered, dear colleagues, in a context of serious crisis marked by the double impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the war in Ukraine,
dépenses liées à la riposte
while expenditure with regard to the health response and economic and social expenditure have risen sharply. Our fiscal margins have shrunk considerably, and vulnerabilities related to debt have been compounded. At the same time, international solidarity instruments that are meant to support our resilience and recovery efforts, such as the G20 initiative to suspend debt servicing and the reallocation, partial reallocation of special drawing rights, SDRs, are not making significant progress. This summit, IDA 20, devoted to considering the modalities for optimum use of resources under IDA 20, is therefore a shining light in the bleak environment. I should like to thank our partners for the historic success of the replenishment of IDA with a record level of $93 billion. I should also like to thank my colleague, President Alassane Ouattara, for kindly accepting to carry with us the advocacy in Abidjan for the replenishment of IDA resources. With regard to the use of these resources, I would like to commend the brilliant presentation by Axel. So when it comes to the use of these resources, our priorities and emergencies are many. Among them, we have top priorities, and particularly job creation. We said jobs, jobs, jobs for the youth, as well as creating income-generating activities, mainly for the youth and women, who are the majority of our African population. Investing in education and training, vocational training, as the Director of Operations said earlier. We have understood that we need to change paradigms when it comes to training and education. Our people is young. Our population is high. So it is unsustainable for our states to keep finding outlets in the labor market for all of our graduates. So we had to find alternative ways of training and job creation. Therefore, we need to make sure that we give employability to this youth, but not stick to the beaten track of post-independence training of elites who are masters of theory and lip service, but cannot do anything concrete. So this change of paradigm is paramount when it comes to vocational training. The other priority is capacity building to respond to crises, health and food crisis, as we experienced in the past couple of years. Exploitation of our resources for fair and equitable energy transition in order to ensure universal access to electricity. I would like to recall that we have 600 million Africans without access to electricity. We also need to support industrialization in our countries. That's why I would like to commend the decision made yesterday by the European Parliament. Since January, we have been making efforts and calling for fair transition, energy transition, so that gas can be accepted as a clean energy, so that Africa can use gas in order to use gas to power and transition to cleaner energy. Africans are strongly committed to renewable energy, but renewable energy alone cannot support democracy in a country, development in a country rather. So we need a basic supply of fuel, and it's either fossil fuel, nuclear fuel, or gas. These conditions are therefore very important, and I hope that the energy issue will be taken care of, as well as the development of infrastructure, including digital infrastructure. So all of these priorities are in line with the Abidjan Declaration of 2021, which we have already validated last year. We are now gathered in Dakar so that the replenishment of IDA 20, which was a success, that through the Dakar Declaration, we can use this as a call to action, so that in the use and in the short space of time we can absorb IDA 20 resources. I am saying this because this record mobilization finds considerable amounts that have not been absorbed from previous IDA. Some talk about 60 billion. I don't know whether it's the right figure. If that is true, then we already have in our coffers 60 billion that have not been absorbed. Why? Sometimes states lack capacity for absorption. Sometimes the very procedures for the use of IDA 20 are obsolete. We have, together with you, to design new mechanisms in order to leverage this money that we really need and that is dormant. It needs to be used. But if we stay on the beaten track, even with 93 billion, in 2 years' time we will say that we have 15%, 20% absorption rate. That is a problem. So we need, in this plan of action, find solutions with regard to new procedures of disbursement. We have common project on which we don't need for each country to carry out studies, and even more studies. I mean, building a road is something that we have mastery of in the continent now, even if it is on quicksand. We know how to do it. You know, building schools, building some infrastructures should not take us that much time in red tape, and we need to pool experiences in the various African countries. What is doing best, what is done best in Nigeria can be replicated in Senegal. Why do we need to go back to square one all the time? And I think that with the teams from the World Bank, with the regional economic communities, or REX, ECOWAS in our region and others elsewhere, we can optimize, in particular when it comes to regional project. With Manjamana, we had a lot of discussions. You know, the Dakar-Bamako railway track, for instance, needs to be renewed. We have spent an enormous amount of time on sharing the concept, whether we should use the metric, track as was built in 1927, which has very low axle load, or do we need to believe in the future and have a standard gauge railway and be in compliance for the next 100 years? It's much more expensive, of course, yes, but it is for the next centuries. And if we start, for instance, producing iron ore, that would also help us use that railway as a backbone for the transport of the ore. And so we really need to make sure that we get out of these bottlenecks. I know that the World Bank has had $600 million waiting in the coffers for several years now. What we said is that we want standard gauge railway, not the rehabilitation of the existing metric gauge. In Senegal, we have the TER Express, Regional Express train, which has a standard gauge. So we can harmonize and together work to raise the funds and overcome the bottlenecks. We want to say here that it is urgent that we have a thorough change, a thorough rethink in the way we use IDA 20 resources. We wish for IDA 20 to contribute to supporting structural transformation of our economies. And this would be done through the implementation of projects and programs supporting sustainable and inclusive recovery. This is why IDA needs to insist on infrastructure, because there also, I think that in Africa, we often have very few partners who are willing to finance hardware. I mean, hardware was altogether abandoned. Everything was focused on reforms. Africa needs roads. Africa needs sanitation. Africa needs power plants. Africa needs railway lines. If we do not build them, we won't get any far. We won't get very far. So how are we going to make the African Free Trade Zone a reality if we still have these bottlenecks? I mean, traveling from one African country to the other, that should not take you more than 3 hours. You spend 2 days, traveling. These are the priorities that we really need to tackle. I wish that at least regional railway lines and regional road networks be areas where we make real progress. This is what is going to open the way to integration among African countries and develop intra-African trade. Without waiting for too long, we have to work to achieve food self-sufficiency by investing more in production in agricultural value chains. We have a lot of loss, post-harvest loss, from small farms, smallholder farms, to large-scale production, including agribusiness. So we really need to work on the value chains from the farm to the table, as we say. This is what is going to help us better resist.
At the G7 meeting, as I guess I was saying last time, that the truth of the matter is that we've been discussing wheat produced by Ukraine and Russia, but we produce much more in Africa. Let's take into consideration all cereals produced in Africa. It's 5 times more than what we are imported. But we are behaving as if Africa was importing everything that it eats. That's not true. We have here 4 million tons of cereals produced locally. Rice, maize, millet, and the list goes on. Nigeria produces cassava and other tubers. Each country produces a lot of yam. This is the staple food of Africa. But clearly, we are still depending on the production of wheat, producing wheat flour, because we like bread. Unfortunately, we do not have enough wheat on the continent. But to fight against that dependence, I would suggest that we build on the capacity to produce fertilizers on the continent. That's what we need more than anything else. We should have our capacity to produce our fertilizers. Nigeria, for instance, is one of the few countries producing enough urea, because they have developed that industry. Senegal as well has a chemical industry that produces fertilizers, NPK fertilizers, because we do have P, phosphate. We have to get nitrogen and potassium. That's where we all depend. K is coming from Russia, Canada, very few countries that have mines of potassium. If you help us turn Africa into something resilient to produce fertilizers, we would necessarily be more resilient food-wise and agriculture-wise. And of course, there's something that is of the essence, controlling water resources, controlling land resources. That's something that we experience in all our countries. But what we really need is proper inputs, good quality seeds, fertilizers. We need to control our water resources because we have 60% of arable land across the world. We shouldn't be talking about famine in Africa. We need resources in the agricultural sector, and we are happy to see that IDE 20 has considered that the food crisis is one of our priorities. And this indeed recalls how important food self-sufficiency is for our countries. In addition to that, we have to keep investing more and better in human capital through these overarching pillars: education, vocational training, but particularly health. We need more schools. We need more vocational centers, more universities and health facilities in order to build up a productive human capital that would be more resilient. By the same token, it's needed to support the emergence of a national private sector that would be sustainable, particularly the culture of entrepreneurship through innovating funding resources. In Senegal, for instance, we have a board for rapid entrepreneurship for women and youth, which is a single window system to promote entrepreneurship, the empowerment of women, and the financing of youth projects with soft conditions, because these youth and women do not have the collaterals required by the banking industry. This is a pattern that we can share. It works quite well, but it needs resources. We need to set up private sector promotion windows of IDA to support this innovating type of mechanism. That would be a good way to contribute to fighting social inequalities, supporting women, and supporting the youth that are creative, ambitious, determined, but just like I told you, they cannot access mainstream banking networks. Now, support to the energy transition. This remains a priority for our countries. We are happy to see that we are more reasonable about it, and in line with the Paris Agreement on climate, our countries are committed in implementing policies of energy mix that would match our development priorities. We wanted to keep investing in sources of energy with a low carbon emission that applies to gas. We need to participate to the global effort to control global warming in line with the feeling of differentiated and common responsibility that we have in respect of gas emission. I'm not going to take you back to everything that we said in respect of the International Energy Agency, which in its report has shown that even if Africa would leverage for 30 years all its gas, more than 5,000 billion cubic meters, the emissions that would come out of that consumption over a period of 30 years wouldn't be more than additional 0.5%. So in total, the CO2 emission rate would be 3.5. So Africa is not the continent that pollutes most. But we need to commend the positive developments seen in the partner institutions and countries when it comes to funding gas projects. We are happy to introduce our project, gas to power project, to change all our fuel power stations into gas power stations in order to bring down the level of emissions and cut down the cost of electricity in our countries. Dear colleagues, I've been long. I'm sorry about that. What I'm trying to say is that in coping with our emergencies and priorities, the maximum use of IDA funding is something real. We need budget arrangements that would be relevant in our countries for economic recovery and resilience policies. And for that, in the name of all heads of state, I would like to ask to all IDA partners not to consider that the use of conventional resources are that this will extensively and intensively improve the level of deficit. If in our deficit we do not compute IDA concessional resources over a period of 30, 50 years, we will definitely release a space that will be used to resource agriculture health. That issue also of ratio calculation of the budget deficit be revisited to have more space, because we do not have budget space. Even if you give us resources, we will be told that we cannot absorb it because our deficit is to the tune of 4%, 5% in Africa. Well, in Africa, if we do not have a 5% deficit, how are we going to manage? Or shall we ask the state to do everything everywhere? So we have to initiate these reforms. I'm not even talking about security here. A country such as Nigeria has been coping with Nigeria for the past 10 years. How many billions have been used to control Boko Haram and terror? Mali, as we speak, Niger, Burkina Faso, they are devoting sometimes 25% of the budget for military expenditure to really rescue the sovereignty, the territorial sovereignty of states that are threatened in their own existence. So we have to call a spade a spade. We should not apply universal regulations because nothing is universal in nature. Axel and the World Bank, I think, should try to help us calculate the use of these resources differently so that we enjoy more space. I think that if we have a plea on softer conditions for IDA 20 using improved disbursement procedures, then we'll be able to take the gamble together and win the challenge. Together we will win, together we will drastically shrink poverty, create resources in Africa, because this is something that may be happening in Africa. I would like here to stress that the reactive response of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in economic and social response against COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen that sometimes you can speed up the process when you want to, because it has been outstanding. Your responses have been swift, efficient. So in this two-tier kind of crisis, we would like you to continue with this pace, keep up with this pace. And as you said, if we have more teams on the continent that have the necessary authority for non-objection, then we will gain in time and efficiency. And I would like to play here so that the World Bank works more with us to increase the volume of disbursements, which is fairly low compared to commitment. That would be a very strong move in this period of deep crisis, whether it's economic and financial. Country-wise, it will be our obligation to continue good governance policies in public affairs, improving budget and fiscal revenues, and We need also to promote private-public partnership that is likely to lighten the share of the state in some investments and therefore reduce the level of indebtedness. Let me reiterate here our appreciation for the constant and relentless support of our bring together
d'offrir à nos populations de meilleures conditions de vie. Et c'est la finalité même de l'IDA, et c'est la raison d'être de ce sommet dont je déclare maintenant ouvert les travaux, et je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
That's the reason why we have this summit conference that I declare open. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President of the Republic, His Excellency Mr. Macky Sall, President and Chair of the African Union, for this statement of the summit conference earmarking the launch of initiatives to resource the development of Africa, that is post-COVID economic recovery in an environment which is marked by insecurity, religious radicalism, and recently the crisis of Ukraine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you are kindly requested to allow heads of government to go to the closed-door meeting room that will be facilitated by the President of the Republic. Please remain seated if you're not part of that closed-door meeting. Thank you very much.
Merci de... Oui, la photo de famille.
The group photo, yes, indeed. We need to take a group photo just before the closed-door meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister of Finance and Budget, for the reminder. The heads of state and government are kindly requested a group picture that will be taken in Zone K. Thank you.
Les autres invités sont invités, voilà, à rejoindre la pause café juste dans le hall de la salle flamboyant. Donc en sortant juste pour la pause café. Merci. Donc merci aux invités de rejoindre la pause café. Et puis nous vous remercions d'avoir assisté.
No.